far be it from me to talk about sports, but with the possibility of seeing the Bengals in the playoffs in the Super Bowl, after seeing the Bengals in the playoffs this year, seeing the Bengals in the Super Bowl has been on my mind. I know how the season ended and that it was abhorrent, but still, the Super Bowl would be a historic occasion for Cincinnati, whose team has not been in the championship game since 1989, just 4 days after I was born. Growing up in Cincinnati, I have gone my entire life without being aware of a Bengal Super Bowl. And for most of that time, I paid the team little attention. But with the Bengals approaching the championship, hype builds in the city, and Cincinnatians ready themselves to support their team. I felt the immense Cincinnati pride, the excitement, and the optimism leading into the playoffs. It would be an extraordinary event for the Bengals to be in the Super Bowl, the first occurrence in my conscious lifetime. Our Torah portion, Yitro, recounts a similarly momentous, once-in-a-lifetime occasion. The Israelites are camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. Soon, God will land atop the mountain in a magnificent display of smoke and lightning and fire and thunder and all manner of pyrotechnics. And from there, God will deliver the 10 Commandments. The occasion is significant, yet it is not the event itself that interests me today. I want to focus on the lead-up to the revelation at Sinai. God recognizes the people might not be able to handle the awesome wonders that are about to occur. Wanting them not to ignore the moment or to be overwhelmed, God instructs Moses, sanctify the people over the next 2 days, that they be ready for the third day. For on the third day, that is when God will descend upon Sinai in the sight of all the people. God prescribes concrete steps so the people are ready to experience God's presence. Namely, they are to wash their clothes. Additionally, our medieval commentator Abraham ibn Ezra observes that elsewhere in the Torah, washing one's clothes is paired with ritual bathing. So the Israelite men and women should also bathe ritually at some point in this 2-day period. Here, the Torah encourages us to take note. Encountering God's presence requires preparation. The Israelites needed to be ready to experience the revelation and understand its significance. If we look to Genesis, we find that Jacob, the Israelites' namesake, coincidentally is a foil for his descendants. Recall that one night during his travels, he sleeps in a nondescript location, he rests his head, and he dreams of a ladder reaching to the heavens with God standing at the top, angels moving up and down. Upon awakening, he realizes, surely God is present in this place, but I didn't know it. Jacob recognizes God's presence only after his vision. He was not ready to notice God beforehand. How easily he could have missed the moment entirely. We should avoid the Jacob model in this case, and instead, we should follow the example of our ancestors at Mount Sinai. We should prepare to experience God's presence. If we do, we can better identify it and understand its meaning and significance in our lives. This sort of conversation presents challenges. First of all, the English word God conjures up certain kinds of images in our minds. However, none of the typical ideas fits what I imagine many of you understand to match divinity or your own spirituality. When I use the word God, I invite you to match it with whatever conception of God, for lack of a better word, you recognize to hold the most truth. Secondly, I recognize that talking about experiencing God can cause many of us to feel vulnerable or uncomfortable. We might worry, what if I open myself to God? Does that make me religious? Again, we have the problem of language. Religious is a word we often shun in liberal Jewish communities because we connect it with certain kinds of practice. But Reform Judaism, liberal Judaism, and religiosity are not incompatible. The fact that we have so many visitors here this weekend engaged in spirituality is testament to that. Let's affirm our challenges and our discomforts, but let's not let them scare us off. Is the Sinai model of preparation really better than Jacob's after-the-fact recognition of God's presence? What we read in the story in the Torah is unsurprisingly a successful encounter between a human being and God. I do not deny that sometimes the sight of the ocean, the appearance of a rainbow, meeting a talented individual might prompt us spontaneously to think, aha, God is here. But in such a moment, we must process both the content and the emotion of the experience at the same time. Expending too much mental energy deciphering what exactly is going on distracts us from being fully present in the experience. It's like watching the Bengals play, as I often do, and being distracted by trying to figure out who Andy Dalton is and not noticing what's going on with the team. In the 10th grade at Sycamore High School, I took AP European History. We spent the year learning, and during spring break, we traveled to Europe to see the sites we had studied. When we traveled around the continent, I was no longer a beginner in European history. I could fit what I saw into an existing framework, understanding the historical significance of what I was encountering. Each building or work of art meant something. My year of preparation gave me the chance to have such a moving experience. We find a parallel in the world of particle physics. When scientists blow apart an atom to reveal its components, the likelihood that they miss a new discovery is very high. Unless they are working from a model of what they seek, the new subatomic particle might, to borrow the words of Harvard physicist Lisa Randall, get lost in the background of all the buzz, of all the other stuff that we already know is there. If particle physicists are not expecting to find something new, they might miss it entirely. Preparing to notice God's presence holds great value. I wonder how much more could Jacob have experienced or appreciated had he been prepared for his encounter with God. To maximize our chances of meaningfully experiencing God's presence, we should take some concrete steps to ready ourselves for it, just as the Israelites did at Sinai. Spiritual practice, practicing for spiritual moments, takes regular work. We call this keva, the routine practices that are rehearsals for encountering God. Keva's other half is kavanah, intention, what it is that we bring of ourselves to any given moment. While keva is fixed, kavanah varies. When a particular kavanah swells within us, keva can give it shape and color, like a filter overlaying a picture. The beauty of a photographed memory can be enhanced by the right filter, so can we better appreciate the meaning of a moment when kavanah is expressed through keva. But using a filter or using keva requires more than mere awareness of it. We should learn and equip ourselves with keva as our concrete step of preparation for God. One of the most commonly recited blessings is the Shehecheyanu, the blessing thanking God for enabling us to reach a particular moment. It is keva, traditionally used for holidays, special occasions, or trying something new. For example, you may notice the imbalance in our chapel this morning. We have brand new curtains over on this side, and we are awaiting their installation over on this side. When they're finally complete and we pray for the first time in our newly adorned prayer space, the Shehecheyanu would be an appropriate blessing to help us recognize that occasion. When I wake up to a beautifully misty morning with the sun's rays shining through the trees, when I return to a special place after a long absence, when I witness the spiritual energy of 59-year-olds praying together, I don't want to think about these moments when they happen. I want to feel them. I want to experience God in them without worrying about finding the words to say. Those moments, those are the moments when the Shehechianu, I feel it practically speaking itself from my lips. I am grateful, knowing the blessing has prepared me to respond to feeling God's presence. Sometimes an incident precipitates our need to call on God for strength. Illness and injury come with being human. When they occur for someone in our lives, we might struggle how to respond. The Misha Berach for healing, the prayer for those living with sickness and pain we offered during the Torah service, is keva for such situations. For many communities, Debbie Friedman's words and melody especially constitute that keva, familiar and immediately accessible whenever we truly need them. When we struggle to process someone's illness or injury, we need not worry about what to say. We can let this Misha Berach be the script. Freely then, we can bring our kavanah, our focus, and on the person or the community in need of healing and support. Death, too, is part of life. When someone we know and love dies, our only job is to recognize and experience the pain of the loss. The last thing we need in that moment is to bother ourselves with finding the right words to say. These are the words that we are told to say. There are no right words anyway. In this case, it's not the words themselves that give us what we need in that time. The words of praise for God might actually be antithetical to our feelings of grief. But we still need the keva, the routine. Here it is the sound of the words, the familiar cadence of Yitgadal v'Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah. That is what we know and expect to say when somebody dies. We need only to allow the keva of the Kaddish to help us feel and experience the emotions of loss. What if, God forbid, something happens to us? What do we do in the wake of surviving danger, serious injury, or life-threatening illness? We can be prepared with keva for those times too, when we need to call out to God but cannot find the words to say. I first learned of Birkat HaGomel from Dan Nichols, who once told a story of his most harrowing experience. He and his bandmates were driving late at night, one night in their van with all of their music equipment. They swerved off the road. The vehicle flipped, the cab caved in, and they landed upside down. Miraculously, no one was injured. Following the accident, Dan struggled to find the words to express his feelings, some mix of deep fear and immense gratitude, wondering, why was I spared? A friend of his introduced him to this prayer, Birkat HaGomel, which is keva for an endangering situation. When Dan sings the version he then composed, his gratitude for escaping the moment comes through clearly. We should be prepared with this prayer and learn it before we need it. It can help us meaningfully process our relief, giving words to shape our kavanah. A little over 3 years ago, when I was living in Jerusalem for my first year of rabbinical school, Israel entered a military conflict with Hamas. On Friday, November 16th, around 5:30 p.m., we heard the air raid siren in Jerusalem for the first time. My friends and I were shaken, but we recognized that we were in very little real danger. I don't remember feeling very scared, let alone the need to pray. At Shabbat services later that evening, we sang these words, Adonai oz la'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God grant strength to God's people. May God bless God's people with peace. I know these words very well. I've sung them for years after every meal at camp. In Jerusalem, after hearing the siren, They were the keva I didn't know I needed. They took on new meaning, filled with the kavanah that poured out of me when the adrenaline subsided. I called on God sincerely in prayer. The experience was unexpected, and for me, it was unprecedented. But nonetheless, I was prepared. God was in that place, and I knew it. We'll never know exactly which season will lead the Bengals to the Super Bowl, and so we can never know exactly when we will encounter God or when we will need to call on God for support. But we can be prepared for those moments when they occur. As the Israelites did at Mount Sinai, we can take concrete steps. We can develop keva, fixed spiritual practices, to help us notice and respond to God's presence. We can give ourselves the tools to shape whatever kavanah arises in response to life and to God. We can prepare so we might sometimes glimpse what our prophet Isaiah witnesses in this Torah portion, or in this Haftarah portion. Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy is Adonai Tzvaot. God's presence is the fullness of everything. When we work at being prepared, we can, even if only for a moment, let God's presence be everything. Shabbat Shalom.